Okay, so this is the second part of status quo bias, and so we're going to talk about habit here and the difference between habit and inertia. So habit, as we all know, we all have lots of habits, is a learned sequence of acts that have become automatic responses to specific cues and are functional in obtaining certain goals and or end states. Habits have intentionality, they have awareness, they are very controllable, and they have mental efficiency. So as you guys know, we have all kinds of habits during the day. So for instance, I have a habit, I get up in the morning and I let the dog out, and then I feed her, and then I start my coffee. So so this is just the sequence of events for my morning. Now, if something happened and I found a more efficient way of doing things, so for instance, if I decided it was more efficient to make my coffee first and then let the dog out so that I have a nice cup of coffee while I'm waiting for the dog, a habit is not something that's hard to change. So if I find a better way of doing it, I can do that. Habits can lead to inertia and status quo bias, but it's not the same thing. So a learned response automatically triggered by stimulus cues, that's our habit. A conscious choice to stay with the status quo even in the presence of better alternatives, that is inertia. So it's a very conscious effort to stay with a particular habit even though we know that there is a better way of doing things. So I'm, a little bit of a mutant, I think, because I'm constantly looking actually for better, more efficient ways of doing things. So for instance, when I empty out the dishwasher, I look at the dishwasher and I choose the plates that are all together at the same, the same type, and they're going in the same cupboard, and all those go all at once so that I'm not going back and forth across the kitchen. This is just a habit. If I'm constantly looking for new ways of doing things, that means there is no inertia in that process because I'm constantly looking for a better way of doing things. Inertia comes when we're stuck in the habit, when there is stress associated with changing the way we're doing things. And so therefore we resist it and we continue going forward in an inefficient way. Sunk costs. So this is another excuse for status quo, for maintaining the status quo, and something that I dealt with a lot, in my previous job. So, from an accounting perspective, a sunk cost is a cost that has already been paid for and cannot be recovered in any way. Because these costs cannot be retrieved, they should not factor at all into future financial decisions. Money has been spent and is a non-factor in your next budget. Some costs in an IS setting include the time and effort already invested in learning to use the incumbent system, as well as the skills related to the previous way of working, which will be lost as a result. So the reason why sunk costs are considered sunk cost is so that businesses can continue to move forward. So a sunk cost is just something we've already paid for, we've already used it, and we don't factor it into the new ways of doing things, or the new investment that we want to make, or the new truck that we want to buy. So, consider, the fact that we have this used old truck, right? And that the sunk cost is associated with the new truck. We don't use that to justify why we shouldn't buy a new truck. We have reasons why we want to buy a new truck. And it may be the inefficiency of the old truck, right? It keeps breaking down, it's costing us money, etc., etc. The same goes for technology and for innovations and the idea of diffusion. Just because we paid for it and we use it and we have skills associated with it doesn't mean it's something that we should continue to use, because there's potentially a much better way of doing the particular task or the business function using new technology. And these are more excuses than they are, valid reasons. The other thing, which I found kind of ironic, I worked for a company for a number of years in a sales capacity. I was a VP of sales, and so I had nothing to do with technology decisions or anything like that. But what I noticed was that people, and these were individuals, really had a lot of attachment to the skills that they had as part of the technology department. And what amazed me was that, during the time that I was there happened to be, quite a bit of layoffs and things like that. So people were very nervous. And it surprised me that more technology people did not reach out to learn new skills. Because when you think about it, when you have a system that potentially is proprietary, right? It was built by Ford, for Ford. You have very specific requirements and needs within the Ford environment, and that technology specifically addresses it. In most situations, well, in all situations, of course, if it's proprietary, this isn't running anywhere else, right? So if somebody were laid off from Ford from a technology job and they had responsibility and high skills in a system that was proprietary at Ford, how are you going to use that going forward, right? You go to GM and you say, well, I worked on this, proprietary mainframe system, and I was, the top guy on this system. And the GM guy goes, well, but we don't have that system here. So how do we translate those skills into something that's marketable? So, when we look at sunk costs and we say we want to preserve these skills, what you want to preserve is the business skill, right? The ability to move a business forward, the understanding of how supply chain works or how inventory management works or something like that. Not a particular technology, especially if it's proprietary. Now, if you've learned a new technology, let's say SAP was just installed and you've got the new version and you're the top guy in SAP, those are marketable skills. But when you're talking about an old system or an old version, let's say of SAP, right? Because I'm not sure what version Dow is on now, but when I called on them years ago, they were stuck on a very old version, might have been 20 years old. Those skills are not marketable. So when a company thinks of making investments in people, making sure those skills are up to date is a really important investment in IT people. And making sure they have newer skills with newer technology that, one, helps the company itself, but also helps the employee maintain their marketability. So I have very strong feelings about sunk costs. But anyway, a way of looking at it. And this is a break here, so we'll have one more video in this section.